could we please stand for a moment of reflection and the Pledge of Allegiance? So I understand we have Mrs. Colombo filling in tonight for Camilla. So can we have a roll call
Mr. Mignon,
here?
Mr. Francis, Mrs. Irwin Adams, Mrs. McGinnis, Mr. Cook,
Here.
Mr. McCauley, Mr. Romanowitz, Mr. Pacifico, Mr. Pappas.
Miss Irwin Adams is going to be a little bit late, but she is on her way.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll immediately turn it over to our budget and finance team for a presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. You do have hard copies at your table if you don't want to turn around. And I do want to say thanks Sue for the verbal presentation. Tonight's focus, as she's going to allude to, is targeting revenue. We've talked a lot about expenditures and taxes and whatnot the last couple of months and looking really at expenditures. So tonight, prior to May arriving with our initial budget presentation, we wanted to really focus on revenue and mind you that revenue is somewhat ambiguous in terms of we don't always know exactly what revenue is going to be because it's dependent on state budget. It's dependent on some other factors at the local level that we will discuss, but we feel like we have a pretty good idea of projections as to where we're going to be, and Sue's going to talk about that. So again, if at any point you have questions, don't hesitate to jump in, raise your hand, ask, and we will do our best to give you the information. Thank you, Sue.
So we are going to touch base on revenue, as Brad said. There are three basic components of revenue. We have local revenue, state revenue, and federal revenue that flows into our budget. After I go through the revenue sections, I will touch base on our position, the progress we've made as far as our deficit goes, and then I'll outline some of the other major changes we're going to make in the budget for this year. So our budget is made up, as I said, of three different components. The bulk of it is our state budget. So 60% of our revenue comes from the state, from the governor's office and the allocations that they do there. Another 14% in last year's budget. It will be considerably lower after we lose ESSER funds going forward. But last year's budget, it was 14%, and then 26% of our revenue comes from local funds, real estate taxes, business privilege taxes, all those other types of taxes in addition to revenue from our sporting events and those types of things. And we'll see some details on that. So this graphic depicts our state funding trends. So the bright blue, or the bulk of this, is basic education. So that's the governor's allocation to each school district throughout the state. That is our basic education funding. And as you can see, we've had really good success in the last couple of years under the current governor's administration with increasing our basic education allocation. So everybody's advocacy is really working, that we have received additional basic education funding. That top line is actually projected for 24-25. So for the upcoming budget year, we are budgeted to receive a significant increase, about $800,000 in basic ed subsidy. The other money, and not as well recognized the need for an increase. The red is basic education funding. Transportation reimbursement is the next number. Plan Con, if you remember, or for those that are new on the board, Plan Con is our reimbursement for our bond payments. So every year we pay about $7 million out in bond payments for our various buildings throughout the district that we've had to sell bonds to be able to pay for those. The state gives us about $1.3 million worth of subsidy to help support those bond payments. So that's what Plan Con is. I'll talk a little bit about property tax reduction. And then the other category is just other smaller grant funds. So your next page in your presentation details all of those lines and what the trends have been since 1819. This year, the grayed out numbers on the far right-hand column, which is our 24-25 proposed budget, those grayed out numbers are the ones that I budgeted for this presentation based on last year. So we don't have the actual numbers for those or any more information to be able to budget those. So this, as I said, basic education has really increased this year. And I'll talk about another grant that we've received, but right at the minute, we're looking at a $1.4 million increase in state education funding or education funding from the state. So that's fantastic.
So just to clarify, that's projected based on what we're hearing, correct?
Correct. So I'll get, there's one more slide that I'll talk about that's kind of really ambiguous. Those numbers based on presentations that we've gone to at PASBO and other state government organizations, these numbers are pretty solid. As I said, on the next slide, I'll talk about one more thing. Haley, I don't know if you want to speak to this or if you just want me, this is a great feather in our cap, and due to the great.
Haley, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and highlight the process. Yeah.
So the slide that you're seeing, PCCD has taken over all of the school safety grants that are out there for schools. So when you look at what was offered this year, we were given 2 meritorious awards where essentially we were designated a certain amount of money based on our student population, our demographics, and then we had to define how that money would be spent. So that first meritorious award for $45,000 will cover a school police officer for next school year. The mental health award, we were able to put into that application continued mental health services that we had previously added for the elementary schools that currently do not have. Well, they have, because over the last several years with ESSER money, we were able to designate mental health counselors for the elementary schools. So that will cover that for a year and a half, the next school year and an additional half of the following school year, along with paying for our Securely, which is a measure that we put on computers to help make detection if students are posting something that is alarming. So that will cover that cost. The last piece, the competitive award, is something that we're really proud of. We submitted an application for the full $450,000 that we were allowed to max that out. So that will allow us to continue services with 2 social workers. It will allow us to put almost $200,000 towards camera upgrades and additions for places that were lacking cameras at this point in time and cameras that are on their last leg. We'll also be able to continue that. I spoke of the mental health at the elementary schools, that we were able to cover that for a year and a half. This will cover that additional additional portion of time so that we can continue that mental health. And then it will also cover an additional year, a portion of it, of that school police officer that we would bring on board as well. So the team did a fantastic job working on this grant, and we're very proud that we got the full 450,000. And as you can see, we were able to really max out the amounts that we were offered. So it will be a very good thing to help with mental health and safety and security in our schools over the next 2 years.
Does anybody have any questions about that grant?
Just to reiterate, so the grant writer that the board approved a little over a year ago now was part of Haley's team, along with some others, have worked very diligently on identifying grants and then really fine tuning the writing of those grants. The more that we're finding and learning is that they're looking for very specific language in these grants, and to be able to maximize it to 450,000, and the competitive piece is really a feather in their cap. They've done a really nice job with working on those, and Ryan and Haley have teamed up with others to assist with that. And just, along those same lines, I know they had supported some other community efforts at grants. They're helping the library right now. They assisted Prospect Pool with a grant through US Swimming, and they were awarded that grant as well. So our grant writing chops are really starting to shine through in our awards that we're receiving and assisting with. So thank you to that team, and congratulations on really, a great effort.
Yeah, I would just add, so I don't know was that a decision that we made in the past 2 years to add Mr. Shope or that position? And it's just an example of, making the decision to add some personnel that it in the beginning seems like an added cost, but then now you reap the reward. So just wanted to point that out.
So as Brad mentioned earlier, these are the parts of the state funding that were in the governor's proposal but are not yet approved. And based on the sources that we've been told, are not expected to be approved. So the Basic Education Funding Commission, if you remember, the existing basic education formula was deemed to be unconstitutional. So the state instituted a Basic Education Funding Commission to explore better ways to fund education throughout the state. So their recommendation was to create an adequacy supplement so that any school district that had spending of $13,704 or less per student should be awarded a portion of this adequacy supplement. The Alton Area School District is currently at $9,128 per student. So if the funding would go through, we would have the potential to get $5.7 million worth of additional basic ed funding. Everybody is that we speak, this does not have the support of the House or the Senate, so it's very unlikely to pass, but it is a start. It's a move in the right direction that at least it's in the budget discussions. But that is on the table. So if you hear anything about that, it would be just a fantastic miracle if we would get that funding. It would balance us and make us a better place right at the minute, a little bit easier to budget, but that does not appear to be the fact. The other thing that is still ambiguous is the property tax relief, so commonly known as the homestead farmstead allocation. So right now the district receives $2.3 million. The governor has proposed another $900 million in allocation to property tax relief over the next, I think it's 5 years. Altoona is, based on our best calculation, we would get an additional $566,000 in property tax relief. Now that goes directly to our taxpayers. So that 5.3 is what it is, or sorry, 2.3 would go to 2.9. It is divided by the 12,499 taxpayers that currently have a homestead filed on their property, and each would get an equal share of that. So we should get a letter from the governor's office. It's to be published on May 1st. So we should know within the next day or two how much and how that is going to work.
Now, the homestead's a guarantee, right? I mean, that's passed. That's going to be given to the taxpayers, right? The homestead.
Correct.
Homestead.
My understanding is that's a pretty that's a pretty done deal. It's just the actual allocation that hasn't been determined just yet.
And I'm sure our state representatives were approved all this unfunded stuff that we're not going to get, right?
I'm sure.
So they're so pro-education.
So then changing gears, does anybody have any questions on state funding before I move into the federal funding? So this is a graph then of our federal funding trends. And as you can see, the dark blue that is in this portion right here, this is ESSER money that we started receiving in 2021. This funding is ending in September of 2024. So that has made a significant impact on our federal funding for the last couple years. The detail of that federal funding is here. You can see that our normal federal money is about $5.6 million. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've enjoyed as much as $15 million worth of federal funding, which the numbers down below in this pandemic relief line. That kind of breaks that out that's specific to ESSER and gives you what our normal federal amounts are, which are somewhere between 5.6. Right at the minute, we're at about $4.6 million worth of federal funding. The difference in that you can see is up here on the Med Access lines. So Med Access in the last year is implementing a new management system. So the ability to pull down Med Access money is not available just quite yet. So that's the difference between that $1 million worth of funding that we've seen the last 2 years. We expect that to be resolved in the next year.
The good news on that is that the allocations that we received in previous years, we have not pulled down at this point, and we still have the ability to pull down 1 to 2 million at this point from previous years, which we will do. Med Access right now, and I'm sure Michelle can allude to because she deals with this directly on a daily basis, it is a nightmare right now. In order to manage it, submit for funding, I think we had asked the board a couple months back for an additional administrative assistant to start with that, to pick up some of the load. That is helping. However, it's not even being processed. So we are working with our legislators, both it's more of a federal thing because it's federal reimbursement. So we're really trying to reach out to Mr. and Dr. Joyce and some others to work with us on this, because the management company that they have in charge of it right now is doing a very bad job. And not just our district, every district, especially with high special ed population, which is where we get our Med Access billing from, is really suffering from it. So we're continuing with that. Knock on wood that it improves. However, we are in a decent shape with what we've not pulled down from previous years. So.
Yeah. And as Brett said, we are very blessed to have a great team, that we have very detailed documentation of the money we haven't been able to pull down. So unlike a lot of other people, we're not going to lose our funding. So we're hoping to be able to pull it down as we go into 24, 25. But you'll see the difference here between federal money and state money. The federal money is very flat. Once you take out the COVID funds, it's state money where we get the additional money. And I talked about the federal funding that was in here for pandemic relief. This is just a refresher of what our revenue has been for the last couple years, what we are using to supplement. So what we've spent on additional programs throughout the pandemic since March of 2020 versus what we've supplanted. And you'll remember, supplanting is the money that we've used this federal pandemic relief to pay salaries. We've used it to pay the CTC tuition. We've used it to fund our internal cyber programs. So that has all been supplanted money. So money that we now have to draw from local funds. Switching, any questions on federal revenue before I switch back then to local revenue? So local revenue is the only revenue source that you as a school board have control over. So everything else is kind of dictated to us, and we are very grateful from what we get from the state and the federal governments. Local money is what we have control over. So you can see here how that's broken out. So real estate taxes are the bulk of that. We also have Act 151 taxes in this area, which allows us to apply business privilege, mercantile tax, earned income tax, amusement tax, flat rate taxes, per capita taxes. So those are all broken out for you here. In addition, the nice 5% interest rates that we're earning right now, I'm sorry, everybody's distracted. Yeah, so the interest rates that we did not have any interest income at all through this early period. So we're projecting to have probably close to $1 million worth of interest earnings again this year, which is really a nice thing that kind of helps pad the budget a little bit. So as I said earlier, this is the only tax that we can control. The Act 1 index, which is the maximum that the school district is allowed to increase taxes, should we choose to do that, is 7.7%. So this kind of shows you a breakout of the calculation to see what additional revenue that would bring into the school district. The assessed value that's here of $3.2 billion is from the reports from the courthouse in the middle of February or early February, I guess, February 6th. And it shows our current base is at 6.7502 mils, which gives us our calculated real estate taxes after the homestead, farmstead allocation. Unfortunately, everybody doesn't pay their real estate taxes, so we have about a 95% collection rate. So that would give us about $18.6 million worth of revenue from real estate taxes on our existing assessment. Now, the courthouse will give us another assessment in the middle of June, and that's what we will use to calculate the real estate taxes for the 24-25 fiscal year. As I said earlier, there is a projected increase in the homestead, farmstead allocation. If we get what we've calculated, our homestead allocation for each property tax owner would go from the current level of $186 to approximately $231. So that would be a $45 increase for each person. And if you look at the line above that I've kind of grayed out, that's the tax on $100,000 worth of a real estate value that gives you your numbers there. So that would mean that these taxpayers in this area, if we went to this level, would not see any effect on their real estate taxes if they have a homestead allocation. So that's kind of a complex calculation, and I've been doing it for a couple of years, so it's intuitive to me. Please ask questions if you don't understand how I jumped through all those hoops and where I got to all that number.
Just want to spend a little bit more time on this slide in particular, because this really looks at the options in terms of moving forward. So under base, that's our current millage rate. So if we would look at zero increase whatsoever, that would be the finances associated with a 0% increase. Our index is 7.7, which means we can tax up to 7.7. So I asked Sue to give you, starting at 3%, what 3%, 4%, 5%, 6, 7, and then 7.7, a full increase would look like. So raw numbers, raw dollars at the bottom that it says increase over tax base, that would be the actual property tax at 95% collection rate that we would realize at those tax increase rates. I promised you this information, started at 3%. We can look at 1%, 2%, whatever you guys want to look at. But essentially we gave you the base, which is current taxable millage. And then the increments of 1 at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 7.5 with the corresponding figures that go with that. So for example, a 5% increase would net revenue of a little over $1 million in this fiscal year for 24-25 in terms of revenue. So I wanted you to have kind of those numbers as a starting point to kind of see where things are. And then if you had other requests or other information that you would like, specifically in terms of taxable revenue at the local level, we can have that for you. But I wanted to give you as detailed information as I could with current figures and numbers based on the projections that we have.
Does anybody have any questions on that? And this number will, of course, change slightly if we get the increase in the homestead allocation that we anticipate.
So just to touch, so if we get that increase, people that qualify for homestead farmstead, even if there is a tax increase, they may realize no actual increase to their individual taxes. As long as they filed the homestead farmstead and that they've done what they needed to do. Most people that are qualifying in that $100,000, range of property value would fall into that eligible category. So even with a voted tax increase, because of the increase in homestead farmstead, they would not actually realize a tax increase on their property in their home. So is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty small percentage of it, and that's not a very big percentage.
I did not look and I intended to and I forgot, so my apologies, but 12,499 homeowners currently have homestead. So I can't tell you how many of those are at 100,000 or less.
So it's 100,000 for the homestead?
No, there's
No.
that's just an
I just
arbitrary.
use that as a number.
The
Yeah.
homestead is available for anyone that applies, no matter
Right.
what income,
Mhm.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
No
well,
matter what their property
Right.
value?
right. No, it's whatever it is, everybody gets it, no matter their income or whatever.
correct. The only thing that, the only
Yeah.
exclusions,
Yeah, it's one, yeah, right. No,
the only
your house-
exclusion would be commercial property or if you rent the property. So it has to be your home. It has to be your primary residence.
It's gonna be tough to sell 7.7,
Oh,
for me, anyway.
I agree.
So you're gonna have to raise them, you're gonna have to raise them, there's no question about it. So, personally, I'd be looking at this, 5 to 7 range, so I'd put me in 6, and that will give you an extra 1.2. Which I think is fair. Now, what would that equate to per taxpayer?
So that-
That difference would be $40 on 100,000,
What was it?
around 40.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. All right.
Does anybody else have any other questions? The median household property in Blair County, well, in the Alton Area School District is 101,000. So that 100,000 gets you close to what the median property value is right now.
Okay.
So this is a comparative to the state. So currently, I think I've talked about equalized mills before. So currently, the equalized mills for the Alton Area School District is 11. So that takes into account all those other local taxes that were on the slide that we talked about earlier. So that ranks us 488 out of 500 school districts. So there's only 12 school districts within the state of Pennsylvania that have taxes or an equalized millage rate that is lower than ours. And I think Claysburg is the only one that's even close to us as far as location. Our personal income and market value to personal income ratios rank 99th out of 500. So even though we're taxing at a very, very low rate, our personal income and our market value is 95 out of 500. So as far as personal income per taxpayer and market value per taxpayer, we're in the top 100 of the state versus what we are taxing our taxpayers, we're in the lowest 25. Make sense? All right, this is the one that I had to talk 14 people through. So if you have questions, please stop me. So the most recent year where we have hard numbers to tell you what our existing deficit is the 22-23 fiscal year. So in that year, you'll remember that we closed the year with revenue in excess of expenditures of about $5.7 million. In that profit margin, for lack of better terminology, we had $10 million worth of supplanted expenditures where we used ESSER funds to pay salaries, tuitions, cyber expenses, other expenses. And that's the supplanted money. So we used it in place of local or state revenue. That shows us a structural deficit of about $4.3 million. So that's without ESSER money, we would have been upside down using our fund balance to the extent of about $4.3 million. We don't have any hard numbers for 23, 24. I could kind of give you some estimates, but we have a lot of funding and grant money that usually kind of filters in near the end of the year. But I can tell you, these numbers are as of the end of March. So 3/4 of the way through the year, about 75% of the year is finished. Our revenue was about 70% of budget. So our revenue was lagging slightly behind the budget. Our expenditures were at 74% of budget. So we were pretty close with our expenditures, but slightly behind. We are projected to supplant $7 million in this year's budget. So that's less than the $10 million that we supplanted last year. But we do have some additional ESSER funds that we haven't recognized yet. So the picture looks like we should be in a similar position to where we were last year, if not a little bit better. Based on the additional revenues and things that I've spoken about already to date, we're looking at about $1.2 million worth of additional state funding this year. And that's the grants that Haley spoke about, less the dedicated expenses. So the security equipment that we are anticipating purchasing is not in this $1.2 million. We've identified and canceled contracts that will net us about $136,000 worth of additional or decrease expenses for our healthcare costs. I think Mr. Hatch has spoken to you about some of his restructuring plans for our internal cyber academy. So we're conservatively estimating $600,000 worth of savings in that program. And then we've worked very, very closely with our buildings to reduce the building budgets by about $100,000. So that would take, if we end up 23, 24, where we were last year, that would take our structural deficit from $4.3 million down to about $2.2 million. So we are making great progress, in my opinion, with reducing the deficit that we had, addressing spending, finding places to cut, and cost efficiencies within our budget. Does anybody have any questions on this?
I just want to reiterate that this was with no reduction or elimination of programming and really just really looking at sound purchasing practices as well as budgeting in terms of looking at how we're most efficiently allocating funds for purposes, whether it be for procurement of materials and resources or for looking at utilization of staffing. So really it's kind of taking a look at what we're doing overall, finding more efficient ways to do it, and to do so without negatively impacting student or staff programming. That is accurate.
Yeah, and I need to caution you, I'm very early in the budget
Mhm.
process. Yeah, if the budget comes in very similar to where it was last year, we will know that at our meeting, of course, on the 15th of May. So we would have hard numbers. But yes, you're right. If we would do that tax increase, that would pull this down, all other things being perfect.
And in theory, one more year tax increase.
In theory, yes. And also, I mean, in 22, 23, we realized the $5.7 million revenue in excess of expenditures. If we can continue with that trend, which again is just being at sound purchasing, sound saving, we may be in a very good place. So that was the money that we allocated to capital reserve out of that 5.7, and then the additional went back into our general fund balance. So again, I think we're making a lot of very good decisions without in any way, shape, or form negatively impacting resources or programming for students and staff. It's really finding more efficient ways to do the things that we're already trying to do. And as Val mentioned earlier, sometimes investing will save you in the long run. So money up front will save us, as we kind of move forward, because you can realize whether it be grant funding or whether it be additional savings in other areas, investing in ourselves is the way we want to go. With capital reserve, it's closer to 30, I believe, correct?
Yeah,
So this would bring it to 35.
I don't.
No,
Or this
No.
would-
this,
I want to say we're at 28, but let me look and for sure. I'll get that number for sure.
Mhm.
Make sure you have it.
So what are the administrative costs that we're saving for healthcare? I'm just curious what comprises that.
So here's where we are. So MD Live, which is an online system where you can see a doctor or a physician online, which is a great program. And during the pandemic, it was a great opportunity. We are not seeing that it's heavily used throughout the school district. So what we are proposing is that we eliminate that program, potentially make it available to those people that use it on a subscription basis. So you can pay $85 per visit, which is less expensive than a doctor's visit. And then we would reimburse the employees through the Prater program or something like that for part of the thing is what we're exploring. So that's $42,500 of it. Azeros, which is currently our customer service representative, we have some redundancy in that area in the program after we've done some in-depth digging there. So we are proposing reducing their scope of work. So this takes their current per person billing is $18 per person. So this would take that down to $8 and restructure the services that they provide for the school district.
So these are per employee administrative costs we pay regardless of utilization, and we do a utilization study. We're nowhere getting anywhere near a bang for the buck. So instead of paying for everybody to have something that nobody's using, we would utilize a system where if they are going to utilize it, we would do a reimbursement system. Because I think when we did MD Live, we only had like 25. I mean, it was limited. I know Michelle's one of them, but we had a very limited number of employees that were accessing and utilizing, that service. So when we analyze the per cost administrative costs, we were wasting money, in a lot of cases. So that's where we're realizing the savings there.
And I just like to make a point. So if you're in a fully funded health insurance product, you don't have the opportunity to do any of this stuff. You take whatever that insurer gives you. The fact that, and I don't know when this started, but the district at some point had the foresight to go self-insured and piecemeal this out and bid this out. And it was a tremendous move. We have an advantage over many, many other school districts who just buy whatever off the shelf and they don't know what costs are tucked in there. By doing it this way, you see all the costs. It's transparent and you can piece it out and bid portions of it against each other. You can bid get another administrator. You could buy another network of providers or access to that network of providers. The customer service component, the third-party administration, you could bid that out and get better prices on it. And nobody else has that ability who's just buying insurance off the shelf.
So, and Mrs. Adams, you had asked too about whether we were recognizing any savings in the current structure of our health insurance plan. I was able to get 6 months of data pulled together, which is not really enough. And Mr. Mignon can probably say you really probably need 2 to 3 years worth of data to be able to analyze to see if one plan is saving you over another. There is not that we could identify significant savings one way or the other in our existing health in that short period of data. So we are continuing to work with it. And that's one of the things that I'm going to talk to the Azeros team about is doing that in-depth analysis. They're kind of an independent third party. They could dig it down into there and look at that stuff. So we're going to continue to work on that and see what we can do going into future years with our health insurance plan. The other thing we are looking at is our stop loss premium. So Mr. Mignon talked about, we are a self-funded plan. So stop loss premiums allow you to buy an insurance policy, basically, that if you have a claim that hits a certain threshold, I think ours is 3 million, it might be 4 million. So if we have a single claim that hits that high of a level, this insurance plan basically kicks in to cover the benefit. If you're going to hit 3 or 4 million, you're going to go probably a lot higher than that. So we have a stop loss premium that we again pay per person, per employee every month. We're actively negotiating and shopping that stop loss premium right now. The other thing we're shopping is our pharmacy and prescription services. Capital RX has been fantastic for us, but it's always good to kind of touch base and make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck there. So that's where some of the savings is coming from in our health insurance plan.
Okay, can I go back for 1 second?
Sure.
So the building, costs, sorry, where you're saving 1 million or 100,000, I guess.
Yes.
I know that we actually reduced like the principal's budgets at like maybe last year or something, and they hadn't gotten an increase in budget for a number of years. How are we continuing with that, or what are we?
The bulk of this is in some restructuring in the secondary level. So the high school had some funding for some of their travel and some of their programming that came out of the general fund budget. They have now pushed that to the clubs. So if the kids are traveling, they need to do the fundraising and they need to raise the money to be able to do that. It's not the full class that participates in that trip, those trips and those travel events. So it's fair to the entire student body to ask them to fundraise for their travel, similar to what a lot of the other clubs do.
So we did a hard 10% cut at junior high school and high school. So we looked at their overall budget and we asked them to look at efficiencies at 10% at both. That money is being held in a reserve that in the event that they would need it, that they would work with us on requesting those funds to be able to be utilized. No department, no team, no club is going to go without. And we've also told them that if you have a need, when we did all of our building level budgets, the first thing we said, is there anything that you need? Is there anything that you don't have? None of our elementary budgets were cut. They're very small to begin with. They're mostly allocations for field trips and some other things. But again, we made it very clear to them that if there's something that is not included within your budget that can't be covered by a PTO, PTA, or some other organization, come to us, we'll have the conversation and we'll look at the available funds within another funding source allocation, Mr. Harrington's budget, my budget, Mrs. Flegel's budget, to look at making sure that we can provide that for kids and or teachers. We don't want teachers out buying their own supplies. I saw a very erroneous Facebook post the other day that suggested that we were out of paper in the school district. I wanted to reply to assure them that we are not out of paper, that the paper actually just needed moved from one place to the other. The copy room in one of the buildings was out of paper. It needed moved from another location in the building. But it is funny how things that get out there that, I think it was, we can put a new turf field in, but we don't have paper, something to that effect. But I wanted to assure them we have plenty of paper. There's plenty of copy paper. And again, we'll continue to make sure that the buildings have what they need from a supply standpoint. Again, using a purchasing procedure through Central Supply, where those types of materials are purchased through, or like they're getting them from our warehouse, and we're getting things in bulk and we're getting things at a good cost, and we're bidding out things like paper. We're realizing savings, even though inflation's through the roof, but we're still making, again, good financial decisions when it comes to purchasing and procurement.
Any other questions here? This is the calculation then too for the Cyber Academy savings. So, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. And I know that this has been a topic of discussion. We had met with a group of folks last week to in depth kind of go over where this is coming from. And again, when we look at our secondary schedules and we look at our ACA program and how we have been really using multiple teachers over a period of time at an hourly rate, when looking at our building level schedules, we realize that we can put a lot of our hourly paid outside of the school day cyber costs. We can absorb those into the teacher's regular day-to-day schedule. So Mr. Harrington, the high school team, the junior high school team, and myself have been working on looking at projected numbers of cyber students internally, as well as the master schedules as we're building them into spring, and looking at where we can absorb and become more efficient. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is, in lieu of using health and physical education teachers on an hourly basis, we're going to be utilizing a full-time health and physical education teacher that in and of itself will realize the savings of almost 26,000. Same with the special education teacher. We're going to become more efficient in terms of providing special ed services to students in a cyber environment, which is very, very difficult and complex when you're trying to meet the needs of students who may be full-time life skills in a cyber environment. So how do you do that? So being able to have that as a full-time person who's available during the day, in lieu of some of our hourly outside of the school day allocations, we'll realize the savings of about 24,000. And then all other hourly options. And this is without really eliminating elective options, level options, because we offer core academic, and honors when needed for any student that is interested in our cyber program or a hybrid of cyber programs. So by looking at our internal master schedules and being able to schedule cyber periods during the day, so an instructor will have a cyber education period during the day, 40 to 45 minutes allocated for the planning, preparation, communication, building of content within their Google Classroom, whatever it may be. Those are times and hours that don't need to be done outside of the school day. We will still have hourly, but again, drastically reduced from what it was before. We will still have options outside of regular school hours for students to directly interact with their teachers. For kids that can't do it during the day, there will be those opportunities during the day when they're scheduled for that period, but we will be allocating hours outside of the day for that as well. And we're meeting with a team of ACA teachers later this week. They had asked that they had some ideas that they want to run by us in terms of how this could be done efficiently and still provide students with the quality of program that we've grown to expect. So we'll be doing that on Thursday and then hopefully finalizing instructional assignments as we move forward in May.
Are we, with the cyber, the person that's going to do the cyber during the regular workday? Now, normally the cyber is done after school hours, a lot of kids after school hours, correct?
So they can work on it whenever it's asynchronous. So they can work on it whenever it's convenient. It's very flexible. So the hours on the instructional end were all they were in addition to the regular school day.
So
Now they are going to be a part of the
Yeah.
school day, but
So-
we're also going to provide them with outside of regular school hour times.
They were in contact with that teacher, correct?
Yes and no. I mean, the expectation is that part of the activities that they would do would be communication directly with students. It may be having like a live session, like a tutorial session, like a Zoom session where kids could log on to for content review, just to ask questions. They do it via email, but they also do it, live through a Zoom type session. If the teacher decided to provide that, they'll still be able to provide that during the day. But then we're going to build in hours where they can do that outside of the school day for those kids that maybe work during the day. That's why they're in cyber, so that they can get that individualized attention outside of the day.
So if we're going to go out and try to get students in other cyber
Mhm.
schools, is this going to affect us somehow, that it's, that we're going to bite off our noses,
We-
split ourselves?
We always have the ability to add. So what this has provided us with is based on our best projections. We are building as much of it into the daily schedule as we need to. Let's say we get a huge influx of students in August and we need to add, different sections for different courses or grade levels, whatever it may be. We can always then add hourly outside of that time. But what this is looking at is projected enrollment, and it's looking at where we are at currently to provide the most efficient scheduling for students that we can right now.
Yeah, I think some of this should be discussed in an executive session with some of the personnel things that we may have to do.
Sure.
Maybe not tonight, but I'm saying sometime that we should talk and see what we want to do personnel wise.
Absolutely.
I'm not the smartest tack in the box, but when it comes to the cyber thing, I'm not as smart as some of the other people here.
Sure.
That I'll need, talk to several people, and I'm still not sold on what we're doing. You understand. I just want to clarify what we're gonna
Absolutely.
do.
Yep, and we can do that either prior to the next meeting, or we can do it tonight. That's why I'd said if we wanted to stay tonight and have a brief executive after, we could, because I'm sure you're getting questions and comments.
Well,
It may be helpful, and we can't do it tonight, obviously, but to have it like a graphical representation, like this is what a teacher's schedule look like, and this is what it will look like, type of thing.
Sure. I mean,
To see it visually,
yeah, very generically, I mean, a typical teacher schedule at the secondary level would be within an 8-period day, they would have 6 instructional periods. They'll still have 6 instructional periods. They won't be adding instructional periods. It's just one of those periods will be dedicated and allocated to building their ACA instruction. So they might have an ACA period of Algebra 1, and they're an Algebra 1 teacher. So the other 4 or 5 periods in the day, they may be teaching Honors Algebra 1 and Academic Algebra 1. And then 1 period a day, they would be overseeing ACA Algebra 1.
Uh,
Yeah, but we'll map it
no,
out
so
for you.
Before and after.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sure.
I don't know if you want me to save my questions or not, but I guess one of the questions that I have is like, are the teachers going to volunteer to take a period and teach ACA, or are they going to be assigned? Because when you come in to teaching, you're not necessarily volunteering to
Mhm.
teach via a camera. Like when you, I mean, a lot of these teachers were hired way before the
Right.
pandemic and they signed up to teach in-person classes.
Of
So
course. So and I appreciate that. We've kind of answered that with the group when we met with them. I feel very confident that even our most veteran teachers have had the experience necessary through COVID to be able to deliver asynchronous content. So this isn't teaching in front of a camera. This is building asynchronous content into a Google Classroom. So they're not, the expectation. No, they can provide that. So like, I'll give you an example. Take my Algebra 1 teacher, for example. One of the things that they could do is videotape their instruction for that day, post it to their Google Classroom for their asynchronous course, so that if a kid was out, they on their own time could watch the instruction and the modeling and the examples that were given for that day's lesson. But it's asynchronous instruction. What we would provide the outside of the regular school hours for would be to provide that face-to-face. So if they needed to deliver direct instruction to a student or a group of students, they would have some time to be able to schedule that and do that. Just not as much time as they have now, because it's all done outside of the regular school day. They'd be given a period in their day to all they would do is build that content, grade papers, communicate with kids, communicate with parents, whatever it may be.
Okay, so the other question is it going to increase class size for the kids that are in school?
It will increase class sizes, but our class sizes were at a point where we either needed to eliminate sections, which meant the possibility of not maybe needing as many content teachers, or absorbing those into the schedule. So class sizes that were hovering between 12 and 17 is too small for a high school class. The average public school high school class in America is 24. So our caps would be 28 for an in-person class, unless it's like an honors or AP or a specialized section. Our lab classes would be at 24 and cyber sections would be at 30. Which is, we have kindergarten classrooms at 28, 29. So I mean, that's not a huge number.
That's a lot for kindergarten.
It is, it is. Not kindergarten, but we have elementary classrooms at 28, correct?
Yeah.
I think kindergarten, we try to keep low.
Yeah, I was gonna say K to 2, we try to keep very low. Our highest right now is 28 in a 5th grade.
28 and 5th grade.
Correct. That's our highest.
So your K to 3s are what, 22, 24?
Yeah, it varies by building. The 20, 23, 24, there is, we're adding a teacher to that section. There was a 2nd grade that was going to be up to 26 for next school year, but we're adding a teacher to that section to reduce that class size, because we try to keep them between 20 and 24 in K1 and 2.
But I'll prepare a comprehensive, if you want to do it prior to the executive, you want to do it at some other point, but complete explanation of where we're at, but absolutely. Mhm.
That is all I had for this evening. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I thank you for your attention and for your tolerance when I tried this new presentation style.
So Sue, next steps then in our board meeting in May, we will have a preliminary budget to be voted on at the May general meeting, which May 12th?
Yeah.
May 13th, May 12th, I believe it is.
And
So that would be our next
yeah,
meeting.
that preliminary budget, that's the one that will be on display. And then we would do the
Mhm.
final budget approval at the end of the June meeting.
So I don't know if I'd be doing the cuts that are proposed right now. Save, I don't know, what about 700,000, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, are there any other cuts I mean, with the with a over $100 million, 125, there's gotta be somewhere, somehow you can cut a few more bucks somewhere. I just think that we'd be remiss if we didn't even if we didn't try to find some other cuts.
So fine, when we did our analysis through the areas that we highlighted tonight are the areas that, again, we focused on where can we make significant revenue generation cuts or expenditure cuts without negatively impacting programming or taking away opportunities for students or staff.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. So obviously we had so your 10% building level, like the bulk of the money is in staff. So when you're looking at any kind of significant financial savings, you're looking at benefit consideration and or staff consideration. So every position that we've had through retirement and or resignation, what we've been able to do is either look at reallocating those personnel. So we had a number of grant funded positions, mostly in the mental health fields. Social workers, mental health specialists, student support specialists that work with our over 200 homeless population. We're going to be able to maintain every one of those employees, even though all of that grant funding is expiring, by looking at realigning the positions of people that may have retired, or looking critically at every position to see, is this absolutely necessary to have that position moving forward, or can it be repurposed into another need area? And we've been able to do that. We're really not going to be eliminating any of the positions that were added through ESSER. We're going to be able to maintain all of those positions.
I understand that, but has to be some other areas somewhere, we can look at other than personnel. I'm just saying, just take a look somewhere, just to ease my mind anyway, so that there's a potential cut somewhere.
The other biggest bang for your buck, I mean, is the 4 million plus that we're putting in outside cyber. So being able to bring those kids back is the single biggest potential revenue that we have. And it's not really a revenue, it's a less expenditure. So if you look at big dollar items, that's one of them. And whether it's through legislation or whether it's through us bringing those kids back into our programs, whether it be in-house, hybrid, or our cyber program, that's where we can realize the most significant savings right now.
Say we bring 10 kids back, what's that save us?
150 grand. And we can. I mean, if you look at like where the potential is for savings, I mean, if we can cut our 280 to 300 number down to 200, that's over $1 million in savings. That. If we can attract 100 of our own students back into our programming. The other thing Michelle's looking at all the time, when we look at, outside placements and special ed costs, we're doing as much, in terms of continuum of services and providing in-house programming that we can. Every student that we put in an outside placement is potentially $50,000 to $75,000 with transportation and fees and everything else. So as many kids as we can maintain within our programming, we're looking at a partnership right now with one of our outside service providers where they're going to have an exclusive partnership with us to take our students. And we will work directly with them on, bringing kids in and out of programming to really reduce cost, but also give us available slots and location when kids need it. And we have kids that need, whether it be temporary or long-term private placements, they need that. But if we can find a provider that is exclusively working with us on providing that, we can realize A, an efficiency, and B, it's going to be a lot cheaper for us in the long run.
Okay.
But we'll continue to look. I mean, we literally went into critical spending a little while ago, which means there's no purchasing approved unless it is vetted by all of the upper administration. And if it's not deemed an absolute need, it's not being approved. So again, I think if you look at historically, when you realize $5.8 million in revenue over expenditures, you're doing well. And if we can continue that trend of realizing revenue over expenditures and budgeting as close to reality as we can not only reduce the deficit, but we can get to a point where we are really financially stable.
Okay.
I know Mr. McGinnis says some of his staff down at Stevens are starting to reach out to some of our parents of students who are in outside cyber, talking to their parents about bringing them back to our cyber. So they started that this week.
All right, thank you. You know, you mentioned that our kindergarten kids that come in and automatically get an IEP because they don't know their letters or what percentage of those kindergarten? I'm just curious how many kids there are. How many kindergarten kids that automatically get an IEP?
Well, it's not, so it's not automatic unless they were identified in preschool, through like Head Start or
Mhm.
through our program or from private agency, whatever it may be. It's not like an automatic. So a lot of our kids through Child Find, they come in. The kids that we're really struggling with are the ones that don't go to an early childhood program. So they're coming to us with no preschool background, really no education prior to walking into our doors in kindergarten. And through the process of screening and then identification, we are realizing that a lot of kids have a deficit, and that deficit may not be from an identified, special need. It may be just the fact that they've not had any kind of education, any kind of formalized education prior to coming to us. What we are realizing is a pretty significant increase in the overall number of students being identified with other health impairment. And that's typically happening at a younger age. Our percentage is going to be probably close to 26% special ed, nearing 2,000 students at the end of this school year, which is a big number for students that have, an individualized educational plan that does from a cost analysis standpoint, they are much more expensive to educate than another
I
student.
don't know how a parent can't send their kid to a preschool. That's almost like abuse.
And
That is
we
abuse.
have every opportunity available through the Lex program, through Head Start programming, through a bunch of different options that are available in our community. We're very lucky to have a lot of really good early childhood education
There's a lot, and
programs.
there's a lot, there's churches that do it,
Mhm.
there's a lot of people who do it. And how and why a parent wouldn't do it for their child is beyond me.
And the research,
Pardon me?
But Lex has an afternoon program.
we do. And the research is very clear. Kids that attend early childhood programs have a much greater likelihood of success than students that do not. There's no mistake there. So it's continuing to really focus on enrollment in those programs. And I will tell you, Amanda Kurtz has done a fantastic job of increasing the numbers at the Learning Express and really boosting those numbers, even for kids that are not coming into the building, but are partnering with other programs that we partner with. So it's a work in progress. It's something that you're never going to win. You just got to keep working towards.
Okay, does anybody else have anything for the good of the group here? If not, I will accept a motion to adjourn this meeting. Second?